Enjoy with your headphones for a better listening experience.
Please watch till the end of the video to have the most scariest part of the story.
Reddit, what is the most eerie thing that's ever happened to you? Episode 5. Me and my friends went to see Silent Hill in theaters when we were in high school. It was what it was, okay to A. Anyway, lights came on and we realized we were the only ones left in the room. We exited into an empty hall. Weird. We then entered into a completely barren lobby. Nobody was there, not even employees. We were completely alone. And outside the glass front we were welcomed by a thick fog. We slowly made it outside and it was dead silent. No cars on the road, no pedestrians, not even a bird chirping in the distance. I jokingly said if I hear the sound of scrap metal it was nice knowing them. We quietly got in my friend's car, all of us on high alert until we finally got into the main stretch of town and finally got into traffic. It was a really weird and eerie string of coincidences. When I was around 11 to 12 years old, circa 1993, in a church van, around midnight or later, we are driving back from a church camp on an old, dark country road in Tennessee that was nothing but cotton fields for miles. Every so often the cotton fields were separated by woods. We see some flames ahead moving in the woods, and as the van approaches that area, a man is just slowly walking out of the woods onto the side of the road wearing, in the middle of summer, what appears to be a long black robe or trench coat carrying a flaming torch, like the type you'd see Indiana Jones holding in a dark cave. Then nothing else for miles on this road but cotton fields. We saw no cars, no other people, no houses, not even streetlights. There was one kid's parent in the van that had a cell phone even back then. She was trying to call the police to let them know there was person out there, but she could not get a signal way out in the country where we were. I was headed to a friend's house to toke and play some video games, and since it was getting pretty late, and I was spending the night, I thought I'd take my car. Just to be sure I'm covered, I grab a box of rolling paper and take it with me. I hop into the car, and I throw the rolling paper on the passenger seat. I took my eyes off of them for one fraction of a second and poof, gone forever. It's like they slipped out of reality. It freaked me out at the time, and I am 100% sure something weird happened as I have still not found them 3 to 4 years later and I still drive the exact same car. I wasn't high either, just a strange happening unexpected. This one happened about a year ago. I have a closet that's of a decent size in my living room. I keep some work stuff, extra blankets, my fiance's spare computer parts, and cat stuff all in there, including their cat food. So of course, whenever I go into the closet for something, our cats will come lingering up by the door in hopes of getting extra food. One day, I went into the closet to grab a blanket from the top shelf. It took maybe 30 seconds. I shut the door and went to chill on the couch, and about a minute later, I heard scratching coming from the closet. It was pretty incessant too. Immediately I assumed one of the cats, we have 3, snuck around me and got in while I was grabbing the blanket and got shut in there and now wanted out. But when I opened the door to let them out, there was not a cat in there. There was nothing. In fact, the moment I opened the door, all of my cats came running back into the living room in hopes of getting a treat. It freaked me out, and to this day I cannot think of what could logically cause that. As a kid, I had a lot of dreams that would come true and weird encounters. I still do, but not nearly as frequently or as intense. I ended up with a deck of tarot cards at about 9 years old. I still use the exact ones, but I have never formally memorized meanings or specific rules or anything. I just go off intuition, basically. There have been many things I have experienced since then that have led me to believe in them, like this. I was invited to a sleepover at about 12. I had just entered middle school and made friends with a girl. She came from a different elementary school and so did her friends. I only knew her at the party, and that was still pretty fresh. Once we settled into the host's room for the night, I started to read this girl's cards. I immediately got the idea that someone in her life was deceased. I was describing the woman I imagined as not her mother, not her aunt, and almost in between those. Not related to her, but important, like a guardian. Everyone in the room reacted with shock, but no one would say anything. What made this different from other experiences is that I began to feel my entire body filled with warmth. It felt like someone was hugging me. I almost wanted to cry and had goosebumps. It scared me. In this moment, I also developed a clear mental image of the person, who I could describe down to the short, blonde haircut, cigarette smell, etc. While staying at a small house for a week or so, while looking for an apartment, my family and I became convinced it was haunted. We saw green lightning coming down on top of a nearby hill one night, in an area with a pretty large population, yet no one we've asked had seen it, and no weather reports we could find were made about such a weird weather pattern for the area. One of the last nights we were there became a pretty solid example of why I believe in ghosts. There was a small door built into the living room wall, next to the fireplace, which led to nothing. Just a small door about 1.5 feet tall, 1 foot wide, and just over a foot deep into the wall. We always got a weird feeling about it, and noticed when it was open, you could only see a few inches inside. Almost like the shadows inside made it seem like it went on much further than it did. I can remember a single time I opened it to see if I could figure out the point of it. I slept in the living room with 2 of my siblings, and one of those nights I had a nightmare about being chased, caught, and dragged. Details about the dream are fuzzy, but I remember feeling hands on my ankles, pulling me back vividly. I woke up from the nightmare at least 5 feet away from where I fell asleep, with that door open, and both my legs inside, to the point where my toes would touch the inside wall if I barely stretched them. None of my siblings could have managed to move me into that small of a space and into that position without waking me. I was about 5 feet 5 inches at the time and not light. I hardly ever think about that place or that little door anymore, but when it comes to mind, it's my textbook example of a haunted house. I'm an EMT. My crewmate and I were called to an elderly lady who had sadly just passed away in a care home. About 10 minutes after we had confirmed the death, whilst we were filling out the appropriate forms, a haunting, distorted tune played from the corner of the room lasting about 10 seconds, which we later discovered was a small clock which was chiming for the hour. However, the batteries sounded as though they were dying as the noise was awful and out of tune. We were on scene for another hour, and it came the time for the clock to chime again. When it did, the tune was a sweet, perfect little chime with no distortion. My crewmate and I still joked that the patient had haunted the clock minutes after she died, and once her spirit left, the clock chimed as normal. I've told this story before. My parents' house is very unsettling, even though it's a pretty bland suburban house. I was house sitting one night and walked past the steps to the basement after getting home from work and saw a massive face at the bottom of the stairs in the darkness, opening and closing its mouth slowly. I had a friend come over and we searched the whole house, no clue what I saw. I've also heard things move in the basement when alone, and motion sensor lights go off on the stairs uncontrollably.
Northern California, on a bike trail south of Mendocino, early April 2014. I'll never forget where I was for this album of pictures. I was riding down a beautiful, forested path and started having the most extreme feelings of something is wrong. I pushed on for a bit, but eventually gave in and turned around. I remember riding like the hounds from hell were chasing me. All I could think was Cheryl had been attacked while waiting for me in the parking lot.
No. She was fine. That evening, we received the call that my brother Daniel had passed away. He had been sick, cancer, for a while, but this was very unexpected. Turns out, during the time of my panic, he was being treated for a sudden issue that ended up resulting in his dying. I'll never forget how scared I was, the feeling of deep dread I felt as I was riding. Miss you, brother. Me and my wife had just gotten married and were staying at my apartment, which was ground level, and the bedroom had a sliding glass door. My wife yells all upset one night, and swears she saw a face in the sliding glass door, but I didn't see anything, chalked it up to nerves. Some months later, there's plenty of snow on the ground, and I get up one morning and notice a pair of footprints on the back porch in the snow right at the sliding door pointed in. It was really upsetting to find, to say the least. The morning when my house got broken into, I was getting ready for work and looking over some of my expensive handbags I hadn't tidied away. I was running late and thought I really shouldn't leave them out in full view in case someone breaks in, but I was so late I just had to go. That afternoon my house was broken into, and the handbags left out were naturally gone. The ones tidied away in their dust bags on high shelves were still there. I think about this a lot. More recently I went to a coffee shop and for the first time ever decided to comply with the rules and leave my dog tied up outside. I normally take her in, and they don't mind, but I thought it's a good training opportunity as it's a very safe area and other dogs are tied up too, etc. The second I stepped into the coffee shop I had a bad feeling that I couldn't shake while I was waiting in line. I can't explain it, it felt like my brain was screaming at me to go check on my dog. I got to the counter and the cashier asked me where my dog is because he likes her. I said she's outside because I feel bad not following the rules. At which point he tells me it's really no problem because she's so small, and that's when my anxiety fully kicked in and I asked him if in that case I can go get her while he makes my coffee, which was to go anyway. I was 1 minute from being done with getting coffee, but I knew I had to go get her. When I got outside, a strange lady was petting my dog and fumbling with her collar. She looked startled when I interrupted her. She tried to play it off like she was just petting my dog, but when I asked her if she thinks it's appropriate to touch strange dogs, she mumbled something about what if she's been abandoned. Yes. Abandoned in a dog-friendly park, next to 3 others tied up dogs outside a coffee shop. I had such a bad feeling about this woman. I immediately took my dog and went to get my coffee. Never again. I was 10, circa 2000. It was about 10 p.m. I was supposed to be asleep already, having school in the morning, but I couldn't, for whatever reason. I've had insomnia since I was 7, not an uncommon occurrence. I heard my dad leaving. He was going to take my cousin out for the pool and drinks for his 21st birthday. Usually, my dad was home with us as he was a single father of 3 years at the time. It would be the first night he went out since we moved in with my grandmother. He did deserve to relax, but something felt wrong. Before he could close the door fully, I tugged it back open and threw myself at him. I clung to his chest and said, "Please don't go. I will never see you again."
I don't know why those were the words I said, but it was a dark feeling I had, I couldn't explain. He set me down sweetly, kissing my cheek and holding my hands before he replied, "I'm only going out with Greg for a little bit. I'll be here when you wake up." He hugged me and I stood and watched him leave before I went back to bed. Those would be the last words my father and I ever said to one another. I had a knot in my throat writing this because the pain and stupid guilt never goes away. I can't even remember if I told him I loved him one last time, but I did tell him he would never see me again, and it wrecks me he had to die thinking about that. Never felt such an unexplainably eerie feeling since. Not much, but I suppose I lived in a haunted apartment once. Would hear kitchen cupboards opening and closing when we were in the bedroom. Sounds like someone was in the bathroom. The weirdest thing that happened was one time when I was cleaning the lounge room, which was adjacent to the kitchen. I'd cleared everything off the carpet in the lounge and vacuumed it. I went to start cleaning the kitchen and went back to the lounge room. Next thing I turn around and there is a little pile of kids' socks in the middle of the carpet. I lived there with my ex and was a long way from having kids, so it proved to me that places can be haunted. I never really felt nervous or anything there, it wasn't a bad energy. The night a missing man, later found dead, nearly jumped on the hood of my car to get away from the large group of college athletes chasing him. I saw him darting towards the road as I was approaching. At first, I only saw him. I could tell he wasn't going to slow down for traffic at all, but I was the only car on the road at that time, so I hesitantly tapped the brakes quickly. He ran in front of my car, kept going between the houses next to the road. As I started going again, I saw a group of maybe 60 built guys, most of them shirtless, running after the guy I stopped for. The guy who ran in front of my car was missing for years after that night. I didn't get a good look at his face, so I never thought it was the same person. Until I watched the America's Most Wanted episode about it. There was a part in the episode they interviewed 2 elderly women who live in the houses by the road. When they described what they've seen, it matched what I saw. That's when I knew it was Jason McMahon running from his killer, Fabian Smart. The story I've heard is that Jason was successful in getting away from them during that chase. But he pushed his luck by showing up to another party house they were at later. He was reportedly beaten unconscious in that house, thrown in the trunk, transported to a wooded area, beat some more, left for dead in a ditch. Hypothermia contributed to his death. One night I got up to take a leak, and since I was still half asleep, forgot to turn on the lights. When I stepped back out of the bathroom, I heard a soft scratching coming from the staircase. A dim light from the street illuminated mirrors, and I saw something that looked eerily similar to myself smiling back from the darkness. I fumbled and slapped the light switch on, almost falling, and when I looked back up it was gone. Ever since that day I always keep some lights on at night. I called my father and some other person responded. The conversation was something like, "Me, hello, is XXX, invented name, there?" Other person, "No, he is at work." Me, "I have been to the barber shop, and he wasn't there, another person, then I don't know where he is, me, I just made this up. Have you stolen this phone? Other person, no, this mobile really belongs to XXX. Some minutes later I received a phone call from XXX stating that how did I know his name and that he had his barber shop closed today. I told him that it was all made up because I thought it was my father's phone. I realized I called the wrong number, old dial numbers. I also received a phone call from the police requesting me not call that number again. I live in Turkey and there has been an earthquake, as you would know. So, I was walking with my mom in 5th of February Sunday, and I saw a liquor store. There were many drinks on a shelf, and nothing was protecting them from falling. Then I go, if there was an earthquake this store would go bankrupt, and my mom said, yeah. Anyways, we went to our house and slept. After maybe 8 or 9 hours at 4:27 a.m. an earthquake occurs. I don't know, but that feeling is not creepy but interesting. I found a dead body in the woods. I wandered off a jogging path for reasons, to this day I don't know why, and walked about 50 yards into dense woods and saw a man chained to a tree, very clearly dead. The adrenaline rush was amazing. My father-in-law had a friend who went to Indonesia. The jungles there are dense and it's easy to get lost, so normally you go out with a guide. The first day the man did have a guide but thought he was an idiot and didn't know what he was doing, so he wrote this in a postcard to his wife and mentioned the next day he was going out alone because the guide was useless. Well, he never returned. His wife, realizing she hadn't gotten a call from him in a few days, the card hadn't arrived yet, called his hotel and found out he hadn't been there for days. So, authorities sent out search parties, but it's vast and tricky terrain and they found nothing. What's eerie is the wife gets desperate after a week and consults a psychic out of desperation. The psychic says yes, she sees a man who has fallen into a ravine, but they must hurry as he is close to death. The psychic even pinpointed the ravine. Search parties go the place and sure enough there is a man with 2 broken legs at death's door. But it's not her husband. It was some hiker who also went out alone and they saved his life. The husband was never found and presumed dead after some time. Years later they did find his remains, I forget the circumstances, but he succumbed to the jungle. I just keep thinking about that psychic who saw a guy in distress and saved his life. At least he was lucky. I was a vending attendant. I picked up and loaded a company van, drove 50 miles, stocked, and pulled money from vending machines and made change for a factory on their breaks and lunch, plus sold fresh donuts to the workers. One day I decided to go check out a new Walmart that was a few exits down. After driving on the interstate for a few minutes I decided that I didn't have time to go and get back before break to make a change, so I got off the interstate and got right back on to head back. All of a sudden there were flames coming from under my hood, so I stopped, jumped out with a tiny fire extinguisher, sprayed the flames and they went out just as my extinguisher ran out. I was relieved. Then a truck drove past me and WSH. The air ignited the flames again. I didn't know what to do. Then a man came over my shoulder with a large extinguisher and put out the flames. I have always said that you would never see me climbing into a truck like a hitchhiker, I would walk. I'd not chance my parents never finding me or being chopped into little pieces, but my job was won the line. He offered to drop me off and I said okay. I immediately felt a little at ease because I had truckers on the cob, and one said I was, insult vulgarity, and the driver turned it down and basically apologized. He said, so, where are you going anyway? I said Portland and he said, oh yes, me too. Where about in Portland? I said. Highway 109. He said, oh yes, me too. Where are you going? I said, Thomas and Betts. He said, comma. Oh yes, me too. What time you got to be there? I said 11 o'clock and started holding my breath, seriously considering jumping out of the truck if he said, and he said, me too. I really do believe that was the longest a person could possibly wait before turning the steering wheel, and finally he veered and took the exit. So, then I said, wow, this is weird. What business do you have at T&B? He said he had to make a delivery. He pulled up to the break room and I had not told him where to go. I said thank you and asked his name. He answered me, but I don't remember what he said. I asked him what department he was delivering to, and he said maintenance. I told him thank you and wrote down or remembered at the time what was on the truck. When maintenance came to break, I told the supervisor that I needed the information from their last delivery. He looked at me strangely and said he had not had any deliveries all day, in fact all week. I asked if he was sure. He said absolutely. So, I asked all the departments about the recent deliveries and there were none from any departments. I believe that the next guy to stop and help me would have been a psycho killer, and my guardian driver saved my life. Logically, he could have just been me too in every question as to not make me think I was inconveniencing him. But the fact that a man stopped who took care of me like he did amazes me. He never got 1 inch out of line. For me it was divine intervention, and I am blessed, but it was still very eerie. I used to work with people with special needs, and I had one particular client that was dying of cancer. I filled in this night for a scared coworker who had been afraid that she would be the person to find him dead. Well, anyway, the night starts, and I do all the things I'm supposed to and normally do, but something just feels off. I go and check on him and he's alive but staring directly at the corner of the wall beside his bed very intently. I asked him if he wanted me to stay with him and he said no thank you. Then around 45 minutes later I went back to check, and he had passed away. It was so strange. I wasn't even supposed to work that night, and the feeling of things feeling off were so strong that I had been texting my best friend until 2 a.m. when my friend went to sleep. My now ex-partner and I were driving back to his super late. It would have been close to 2 a.m. We drove down his street and there were a couple of parked cars out front of a shop front, and for some reason my eyes went to one of the cars and I noticed a woman with short brown hair who appeared to have been either crying or she just had her head down in a sad posture sitting in the passenger seat of one of the cars. It creeped me out, so I didn't say anything. A minute or two went by and my partner asked me if I saw the same thing. We went back not even 5 minutes later. The same car was there but no woman. We were both trying to rationalize what we saw until I asked my partner if she had short brown hair. He stayed really silent and went home and didn't want to talk about it anymore. It was creepy. I've never experienced paranormal activity, but one time me and my coworker traveled to a distant rural village on a job. There was no hotel, so they let us sleep in a community hall bedroom. There were 2 beds and we slept in the same room. Usually when I travel I sleep deeply, but that night I woke up at least 10 times. The light was on, and I glanced at my coworker, and he was soundly sleeping every time I woke up. I was tired so I managed to fall asleep after a minute or two, but something always woke me up. This morning, I asked whether he slept well, and he said he woke up multiple times too. I was asleep every time he woke up. Later that day the men semi-jokingly said the hall was haunted. Background information. So back where I used to live in Oregon, I had this place I hand-built over a month or so in the summer I would hang out in. Inside the forest it was my home away from home basically. I built a large fire pit in the ground, 2 chairs, a bench, a log rack/drying area, a hammock, store-bought, and even a small Viking-like structure with a mat on the inside made of twigs so you could sit in it. This spot I made was next to a hot spring inside a flowing river with a tiny waterfall. So, as dumb as it is to be alone in the wilderness, I always brought my little gun and bear spray. I just liked to be in the forest. It made me feel close to nature like my ancestors were. Cherokee story. One day I was heading out to there, when I noticed a male watching me walk into the area of the forest I would always enter from. Everything made me feel uneasy. I don't trust men all that much. A woman shrugging, medium skin tone. Anyway, I ignored it but kept my hand on my hip where my firearm was as I walked and hiked go get to my spot. Everything was normal on the way there except I heard a few branches break behind me every so often, so I was constantly checking. I am used to the sound and animal sounds, but something about that guy made the solace the forest always brought me break. Once I finally arrived at the spot, I set my things down in the small shelter and raked some leaves and other things out of the area with a small rake I built. Once I did that, I decided to dip in the spring. I set my bear spray and gun on my clothes next to the water and got naked. Nobody ever comes there, it's not a trail or on any map, don't judge. I dipped inside and tried to relax. Well, the moment I finally let go of the paranoia, the forest went completely silent, which if you know better means there's a predator around. So I had my hands near my items and just silently waited. It felt like forever, but I started hearing an odd noise. It sounded like someone yelling help, but lots of animals in distress sound weird when dying, so it didn't spook me. But going further, I heard twigs snap again closer to me, which is odd for a few reasons. One, mountain lions will almost always make zero noise when checking you out. Two, if it was a bear, I felt like I would have heard it make some sort of noise, but nothing. When a few moments passed, on the crest of my little area I noticed a wolf, I think. It was large, resembled a dog, but it was almost all black fur. Just staring at me, I grabbed my gun in my right hand and the bear spray in the left just to be safe, but nothing. After about 10 minutes I think it left. I decided to chalk up today's visit for my safety, so I gathered my things, dried off and left. As I left, the forest was silent still, no animals, no birds, just a small gust of wind maybe once in a while, and I felt dreadful, like it felt as if the world was rotting away, if that makes sense. Anyway, after a few minutes I exited the forest and that guy I saw earlier was standing at the edge of the forest as well, not near me but a little way away, just staring into it. I walked till I got to my motorbike and left. To this day I'll never forget that odd feeling of dread when I was there. It physically made me feel like I was going to be attacked the entire time. I don't know. Woman shrugging, medium skin tone. Eerie story from the life of me, Nix. Played Bloody Mary at a slumber party when I was 14 at my buff's house. I was sitting outside of the bathroom watching because I didn't want to play, and neither did a few other girls. There were like 12 girls there. The girls in the bathroom stopped playing because they thought the girls waiting outside were locking the door to be funny. We thought they were locking themselves in to try and scare us. To this day I'm not sure if they were messing with me. We never played that game again. Her mom was really pissed we did that, too. I was on a hiking trail with two of my friends on one of the hottest days that summer. We were heading back downhill, and I was a good bit ahead of them. I finally got onto flat ground and noticed a man in a full suit and tie standing silently on a small bridge. The suit was super neat looking, without a wrinkle on it, and the man wasn't even sweating. I immediately wondered how he could have walked this far without getting his suit dirty, especially because it had rained the night before and it was super muddy. He turned to look at me and just stared for a while, didn't say anything, or make any reaction at all. Just stared. Freaked me, and I ran back uphill to meet up with my friends. We made it back down to the same spot together in less than a minute and the man was just gone. I still have to remind myself that it was real to this day. Not eerie, just really strange. This happened to me in the summer of 2016. I used to work in a warehouse that stored frozen foods, biological samples that needed to be frozen at all until they were used and the like. The point of this information is to work in a place like that I had to wear a big thick warm coat. Once I left work I'd shed the giant coat and throw it in the passenger seat of my Econoline van. Now to the story. I've left work and made my way home, driving through city traffic getting ready to hit the highway. I'm zoning out at a red light and am just kind of staring out of my windshield waiting for the light to change when all of a sudden I see the strangest thing. As I'm sitting in the light I see an orange-golden amorphous cloud on top of one of the trees lining the street, just sitting above a giant limb floating. I at first think I'm seeing things or the light from the sun is being filtered oddly through the tree, but then I notice it getting bigger and am a bit confused. I then realize it's not getting bigger but in actuality is floating down towards me. I'm sitting there in awe wondering what these things are when the light changes and I slowly hit the gas, reluctantly driving forward, thinking that whatever this thing is that I'll never see it again. I was wrong. As I'm slowly driving forward, it's flying towards me and is close to making contact with my windshield. It's almost like it's shocked I can see it and is just as curious as I am about the whole situation. As I'm moving forward and it's moving toward me, we're bound to meet in the middle. I at the time had never really dealt with anything like that before and didn't know what to expect. I can say though that this thing was giving off positive, curious vibes, nothing malevolent or coming from a place of manipulation. I expect to make contact with it, and since it appears like an orange golden gaseous light, I expect it to come in through the windshield like I'd imagine a ghost would easily pass through it without an issue. I unfortunately was wrong. As soon as this being hits the windshield, I actually hear a cracking sound. It was so unexpected. I heard a loud crack as it made contact. I then expected at least a small fracture in the windshield, but nothing. For a second I thought it had made contact with the car and couldn't pass through and left. If that were where everything ended, I would have somehow convinced myself it happened in a unique way. It was sunlight, not a being, etc., etc. As I'm driving and right before I hit the entry ramp to the highway, I notice my huge winter work coat sitting next to me is shaking all over. I know this sounds completely insane, but it all happened as I'm telling it. The coat is shaking like a scared or hurt animal. It's not making extreme movements or anything, but definitely is shaking. Imagine a scared dog and how they curl up in a ball and shake all over uncontrollably. That's exactly what my coat was doing. I knew that whatever that being was, that it was now in my van and sitting on and in my coat. I have no other way to describe the situation. I then explained I was heading home and had to take the highway and I'd be going pretty fast and that it could leave if it wanted. I even opened the door for it. On the way home I kept replaying the whole thing over in my head and thought about how crazy the whole thing was. I also knew that if I hadn't experienced it I wouldn't believe it. I thought I'd never see this happen again, but I was wrong. Shortly after this I started noticing an orange cat-like being in places cats are to be expected and places where cats aren't to be expected. First on the road driving back and forth to work. Different points on the road, and at first I didn't put two and two together. Then I saw it in my parking lot at home. I then saw the same looking being in the freezer at my warehouse. I realized that what I had experienced was unique and that this cat I was seeing was related to that experience. I still doubted myself until I came home from work one day and my girlfriend told me that she thought she'd seen a weird-looking orange cat in the house. I of course told her some of what happened with the windshield and coat the day it happened, but didn't go into elaborate detail because I knew it sounded completely insane. I definitely didn't tell her I thought an orange cat-type being was following me around. I still see him to this day, and she does as well. He seems to have become quite attached to us. I have no idea why, but we've accepted him as well. Don't get me wrong, it's not like I'm seeing it constantly or even daily or weekly, but I do see it at least every few months. I've woken up to it walking along the floor on two legs, peeking over at us like a little kid would see if we'd woken up yet in the morning. It's always orange, golden, and always somewhat transparent. Me and my girlfriend have both compared notes. We both agree it's cat-like but humanoid, varies in size from adult cat size to me guess a small primate, golden orange with 2 or 3 black tabby cat-like stripes that circle its belly and back. Sometimes it looks completely like an orange and yellow tabby with 3 black stripes, while others it's definitely more humanoid with cat-like traits. It's always small though, cat-sized to toddler-sized. Even when we don't see him we know he's always close. I have no idea what he actually is, but I think he's a type of pusa/puka/puka. I also consider him family now. I know this sounds completely absurd, but I swear to you it's 100% true. I would not make up something so absurd sounding if I were attempting to pass something paranormal off as true. At first I thought I was losing it, but when my girlfriend saw him I felt better knowing that there was some substance to this being and it wasn't because of some mental disorder. It's never attempted communication as far as vocally or telepathically. It gives off a vibe for sure though, and I can notice it rather quickly. I've never been fearful of it. Like I said, we think of it as family. After my experience with it I started researching and reading about the fees, animal spirits, ghosts etc., trying to figure out what was going on. I don't really share this story with anyone, and in fact my girlfriend is the only one that knows the entire story, which is until now. Thanks for your interest. In case anyone is wondering where this happened at, Kansas City, Missouri. Thanks. I'd been awake for about 40 hours, for horrible reasons. By the time my husband and I got home, knowing the following few days weren't going to be any better, I went to bed and just completely fell asleep. I woke up the next morning already stressed, only to find I wasn't wearing anything remotely close to what I had been when I'd gone to bed. When I said that to my husband, he was slightly confused, as apparently when he'd come to bed about an hour later, if gotten up, had a conversation with him, changed my clothes, got back into bed, and went back to sleep. I've zero recollection of any of this now 5 months later. For our honeymoon, my wife and I took a road trip from Michigan to Bull Shoals, Arkansas, where my cousin gave us use of his cottage for a week. Beautiful countryside, especially in early fall. When we finally arrived, unloading our stuff into the house, we heard the howling of coyotes in the moonlight, which made us move a little faster. There wasn't another neighbor for at least 2 miles in each direction, and it was pitch dark except for an outdoor light on the shed in the back, so the seclusion contributed a little bit to the eeriness of it. Later that night after dinner, we stepped onto the front porch, amazed by the blanket of stars overhead, a sight neither of us city kids were used to. Meanwhile, the kitchen light inside flipped on for a few seconds, then turned off. It wasn't a surge, and it wasn't motion detection. It was weird though. The next day both of us smelled burning sulfur, and wondering where it came from, she wandered into the kitchen, I went to the basement, and as suddenly as the overpowering aroma arrived, it dissipated. Okay, I thought, that's 2 things now. That night, I heard someone trying the side exterior door handle, which was weird, because like I said, there were no neighbors nearby, and the road was pretty secluded. I saw the exterior light on the shed illuminating the door, and the handle kept rattling even as I approached. There was no one in the window that I could see. I shook it off, chalked it up to imagination and an unfamiliar place, and went back to bed. I lay down next to my wife, who was asleep. I glanced at her face in the moonlight, and I was shocked to see it grotesquely twisted into this evil, demonic-looking countenance. I had never seen that before. It nearly stopped my heart to see it. What the hell, I thought as I scrambled backward off the bed. I shook her awake and her face relaxed, the twisted scowl giving way to confusion as to why I was walking her up. She didn't realize it, she didn't have a bad dream, and I have never seen her face like that since. We talked about it, and decided we were going to try to stick out the week, as we had another 6 days there. But the next night as we were laying down to sleep, we both heard the sound of heavy boots tromping up the wooden steps inside the house. I grabbed the curtain rod and cautiously went up the stairs, because I was stupid, or I was strung out on adrenaline, but the stairs led to 2 upstairs bedrooms and a bathroom, and there wasn't anyone there, the doors were both open, and the windows were both locked up tight. We immediately began packing and left before the sun came up. I talked to my cousin, who was absolutely shocked to hear what I shared with him, having never experienced anything like that in his time there, and to this day, I feel like I still owe my wife a peaceful, haunted honeymoon. I was canvassing an area for work and had this awful feeling about a house I was approaching. I refused to go up and knock, but my boss insisted. I stood at the door and thought, I don't want my fingerprints on the doorbell. I didn't knock, there were flies, and someone pulled up as I was turning around, reached through and grabbed the mail out of the mailbox from the driver's side, but the passenger side was closest to the mailbox, so he just threw himself across the seat, grabbed the mail, saw me, and peeled out. I felt super weird about it. A couple of weeks later, a news story dropped about a guy who killed his parents over the money in their safe, took it, went on a drug binge, and had been going back to the house to get the mail because in his drug-fueled psychosis thought that would ease suspicions or buy him time or we. Surprised face. One night I couldn't sleep. I was extremely paranoid. I had this feeling that someone was going to try and break into my house. It was so weird. I've never had this feeling before. I'm not superstitious, which made me feel more at peril. I barricaded my back door. Told my wife to take the kids and lock herself in the upstairs bedroom, loaded a shotgun for her and told her the password to open the door. I moved the couch to the perfect position to stare at the door and be able to shoot first. The sun rose around 6 a.m. on Sunday morning and I got a call from my mom. Someone had shot my cousin. Was deployed in Afghanistan. We had engaged some terrorists, and it wasn't till night where we could investigate for what's called battle damage assessment. We were hearing coyotes, stray dogs, and goats all night, and if you've ever been exhausted and wearing night vision, you know what I am talking about. We started to feel like those animals screaming at night were ghosts, and the lot of us basically hallucinated demons walking around as those animals screamed. Absolutely terrifying. Back in high school, this girl from the same year as I died in a car accident. Didn't know her too well, but I saw her around school. A few months later, I saw her walk into the gas station I worked at. I couldn't really see her, and I kind of just stood there half frozen as she was walking up to the counter. I took a good long look at her as she was paying for her gas, and it was 100% her. When she left, I got this super sick feeling and couldn't process that I'd just seen a dead chick come in and pay for gas. Later found out from my friends that she had an identical twin sister that went to another school. Was still a super eerie feeling, though. I once had a dream where I went to my aunt's house. I hadn't seen or spoken to this aunt for about 20 years and hadn't really thought of her at all. Anyway, when I knocked on her door, in my dream, she answered, but as soon as she did, she was sucked into a vortex behind her, screaming out no as she did. The dream skipped to me clearing out her belongings from her house. As soon as I woke up, I received a phone call from my mum saying that my aunt had died during the night I had that dream. It's a true story. I used to think dreams were nonsense, but this has changed everything. I grew up in an incredibly conservative Christian environment, and when I was a teenager, my school in Oklahoma City area had us go door to door selling religious books. The adults who drove us around and dropped us off were overly zealous and always trying to get just a few more sales in, even if it was past time to round everyone up and finish for the day. One evening, it was about 9 p.m., we were supposed to have been picked up for the day, but our driver said one more street. So, she dropped me off and I was supposed to work my way over about 6 blocks to meet a classmate. It was dusk, and not a great area of town. I knocked on one door, 2 guys answered who were obviously drunk and high. They wanted me, 15F at the time, to come inside the house. I refused and was trying to make my way off the porch, but one of them grabbed me by the wrist. I was trying to break free when a policeman in full uniform walked by on the sidewalk and asked what was happening. The guys immediately let go of me and slammed the door shut. The pogoing at office asked me what I was doing out there at night, and I explained. He walked me about a block and a half away to a gas station and told me to wait there until my leader came back into the radio distance. She had left the radio area so I couldn't call for help before. He then just disappeared. I don't really believe in people seeing angels on earth etc., but I passionately believe that police officer saved me that day. Whether it was just happenstance that he was walking by in uniform, woman shrugging light skin tone, no patrol car anywhere that I could see, or it was an actual angel who kept me from being attacked that day. I'll never forget the weird feeling afterwards that I had just avoided something absolutely awful. My girlfriend's mum was taking us 3 girls to see Freaky Friday, the original. I woke up that morning with a bad feeling and my girlfriend did as well. We called off the trip and planned to go another day. The train we would have taken became the news headline. The Granville train disaster. I learned the hard way that when they put you to sleep before surgery it doesn't always work perfectly. Had an arm surgery, luckily it was the last of many, and the anesthesiologist wished me a good sleep, then I just couldn't move. I couldn't move and was present and awake of every single stab and slice. I heard the drill they used, and I heard the commentary. I was screaming inside because I felt all the pain and I just wanted to die. It was horrible. When I finally got my movement back after a 7-hour surgery, I told the nurse to take me to the anesthesiologist. He came and I told him what happened. He said that it happens sometimes, but the patient usually forgets once the surgery is done and that he'd prepare some more painkillers for me and make sure I got some food. It was horrible. Now I get points when I'm in hospitals and my arm burns whenever I drive past one. I've avoided any hospitals since, and even when I've been cut deep I've sewn it up myself. It's one of the worst things I've ever experienced, and whenever I gain the courage to tell someone about it they say I'm lying and that doesn't happen. It hurts to try to tell people about that horrible experience and then get called a liar. My sister was pregnant and in her 9th month. I was sleeping and had a super vivid dream where I am either pregnant, or inside the belly, or both. It felt very real, and then I suddenly felt myself leave the womb. I woke up, it was night, and I didn't want to wake up my partner, so I didn't text my sister or parents to hear the truth. During the morning I texted my mom. Turns out that around the time I had the dream my sister's water broke. I was actually barely thinking about my sister's pregnancy. We live in different countries, but I do love her a lot, and in my head that was always a sign of our strong bond. Still, quite creepy. The other 2 super vivid dreams I had was when each of my grandparents from my mom's side died. I had a post-death conversation with them. I used to write down dreams at that time and I had quite a good sense of how my dreams function, and this just felt so quite different. I honestly think these were 3 cases where something other than dreaming was happening. Went home early to go to bed after hanging out with friends at the park, was about 16 at the time. It was about an hour after I'd fallen asleep, 1 a.m., when I woke up in a panic knowing something bad had happened to my friends. I grabbed my phone off the nightstand, and it started ringing in my hands. A friend from the park was calling to tell me they'd just been assaulted by a group of guys. Police and ambulance were on the way. Thankfully no major damage was done to anyone, just scrapes and bruises. My theory is that our brains, like old-ass speakers, know when a call is coming in before the phone really rings. My subconscious put 2 and 2 together that they'd only be calling if something bad had gone down and woke me up. Not me, but my mom. My mom isn't a religious person, but her parents, my grandparents, are. To appease them, she decided to get me baptized. Well, prior to the baptism, she had a horrible recurring nightmare of me crying in my crib, and when she would check on me in the dream my eyes would be glowing red. Like, fire truck red. My mom said she never had another nightmare like this after I was baptized. After she had my sister, the same thing happened. They stopped again after her baptism. I'm not religious at all, but I still find it creepy as all hell. Okay, so this happened in 2017. I was asked to be the one to look for my aunt's house, a 4-story house with 9 rooms. My aunt and her family went abroad at that time, and the only people left in their home were me and my grandma, their mom. She's too old to travel, so, one time, after washing the dishes, and closing the doors and the blinds, I went to the living room to watch a TV show. All the lights are almost out at that time except for the lights outside the house. Something urged me to go check the windows on the 4th floor. In order for me to be able to go upstairs, I need to turn on the lights which were located on the 1st floor. The living room is in the 2nd. So, while I was walking half my way up the stairs, I saw some footprints of a child. Like wet footprints. Ha ha ha. Upon seeing those, I immediately rushed downstairs to where my grandma's room was located. I didn't bother going back to the living area to turn off the TV. Mind you, they are the only house standing in their street. They are surrounded by vacant lots and huge trees. To this day, I still don't know how those footprints got there. Years ago, my friend and I stayed up all night playing Halo. It was about 4 a.m. and I went up into the kitchen, quietly while my parents were asleep. I got upstairs and started making myself a bowl of potato chips when I heard a loud bang and monstrous roar from downstairs. I froze and became filled with where. I pushed myself to get the biggest knife possible and slowly peeked downstairs. There was nothing. Then I looked up and noticed one of the windows near the ceiling was wide open. I got my chips and ran back to my room and told him all about it. It was a dream I had. I was just laying down on a bed, I think, and 3 old people were in front of me, just standing there. They didn't talk and they didn't move, they were just there, but there was something extremely unsettling and eerie about them, like they weren't human, and they didn't have a face or a body either. They were just shadows staring down at me and I couldn't move for some reason. Still sends shivers down spine even though it happened a year ago. When I was 12, I stayed at my nan's house in the bedroom. The door was open, and the hallway light was on, shining into the room. The shadow of a perfect human head complete with ears was cast on the wardrobe. But there was nothing in the way to cast the shadow. I was waving my hands through the shadow and my hands were disappearing into it and coming out of the other side. My siblings were there. None of us can explain why that happened. A shadow of a head, with nothing in the direct line of sight to cause it. When I was a young kid, about 5/6, I lived with my grandparents and parents as they were trying to kickstart their business. Anyways, my great uncle lived there as well. He was about 68 to 70 and a bad alcoholic, very grumpy, didn't really like anyone. All he wanted to do was drink in his room and read old Western books. For whatever reason, he adored me and loved having me in his room to read to me. Unfortunately, he passed away, so my parents cleaned out the entire room top to bottom to prepare it to be my room. About 3 days later, my parents saw me walk out of the room with a Western book. The room was bare, freshly painted. They asked me, "Hey, where'd you get that book?" I replied, "Uncle just gave it to me to keep." My parents still tell the story to this day and get visibly uncomfortable. Pretty eerie. I was 15-ish. My parents and our neighbors were sitting in the garden talking. I was in the living room. My mother came in, didn't talk to me, passed me, and went to the bathroom. I'm sure she didn't leave the bathroom. A few minutes later she came back from the garden, again. This time she really was my mom. I still don't know what was the first one. When I was about 13, there was a serial killer murdering students close to where we lived in Ann Arbor. Being the stupid-ass teenagers we were, we got a Ouija board and decided to call up the last victim. Went down to the basement, turned off all the lights, but we could still see a few candles, but mostly from a streetlight shining down in the basement window. We all put our hands on the planchette, which jerked hard to the number 5. Shocked the hell out of us. We all drew back, then the candles blew out, 3 in different corners of the room, and the planchette moved again, pointing at the oldest girl in the room, who must have been 15 at the time. We noted out and turned on the lights. About a week later, they arrested her cousin, John Norman Collins, for the murders. Welp, I have 3 things I want to specifically talk about. No one's probably going to read this, but anyways, here I go. So, I don't know if this is how memory works, I think. I remember one specific memory of being 6 months old and looking out the window in our old house, and then I remember it not existing. Like, I remember my life starting from this creepy incident. So, this is where my continuous memory starts. It was around midday. I would have been 4 years old. We had just got out of our car and were moving into our new home. It was an apartment, one house per floor. Ours was on the top floor. Mom, for some reason, was not there. Dad went to the side to look at some shops. I don't remember where my brother went. I entered the building. The steps were really dark, and there was an odor. I run up the first few steps, and suddenly, I don't know why, but I freeze and look up. There it was, with God rays leaking from the silhouette, a distinctly white, flowy figure standing atop the stairs. It made a deafening hollow sound. I tried to turn around and run, but something held my ankles, and I fell down. The next thing I remember was being angry at my brother for trying to scare me, but he told me he was with Dad. It was barely moments later. There were kids that lived there, but all of them were at school during that time. I didn't have any scary stuff happen after that. To be honest, I have my second best memories there. This second one happened when I was about 10, had moved into a new house. This was the top floor too, with a wide open balcony that had an uninterrupted view of the sky and neighborhood. This detail is for the third story. So, I had a fever, it was nighttime. My parents were sleeping with me in between. Suddenly I wake up and have this uncontrollable urge to run to the bathroom. I didn't want to pee, but I just had this unavoidable feeling to run. I got up from bed and started walking towards the bathroom. When I reached there, my dad put his hands on my shoulders, and I want to snap out. I probably remembered nothing but felt sweat running through my forehead. I asked him, it was a good run, wasn't it, which, for some reason, creeped him out so much that I could see the color drain from his face. He made sure I didn't have to use the bathroom, then carried me to bed. Weirdest part, I didn't remember any of it the next morning. A few weeks later, we were on a school excursion to a milk factory and some impurities, according to newspapers, crept into the goodies we earned, milkshakes. All of us had fevers for the next 2 days, and during this time, one night I had a dream, viewing all that I mentioned above, only in third person. When I woke up and told everything to Mom, she said it was the exact thing I didn't remember happening. Down to the exact same thing. I asked Dad, it was a good run, wasn't it? Now this third happened shortly after, but it's not really scary, just eerie. Same house, we lived in the temperate zone, so it barely went below 10 degrees Celsius, actually it did go below, in 2018, first time in 30 years. This happened in the summer of 2015. It was around midnight, or at least it was supposed to be. I had a habit of getting up at night to pee and while returning, go to the balcony and look at the stars for a while. So, I was returning to bed, as usual. I walked up to the balcony to have a look at the stars, when I noticed sunlight leaking in through the bottom of the door. I slowly grabbed the handle, pushed it open, and as I walked out, everything was wrong. It was broad daylight, it was snowing, and there she was, staring directly into my soul from across the balcony, that white woman. She had appeared in my dreams before, but it was only a couple of times, and it was the sort of hero's journey dream that kids have. But only she was different. There was something unsettling behind those glistening white eyes now. Every part of my body was screaming at me to turn back, shut the door and never open my eyes again, but as if involuntarily, I walked forward, one step at a time. As I got closer, this happened about 30 years ago. My best friend's son was 3 years old, and we strolled around in a big general store. They had a huge pet department and the little one wanted to see the animals. While walking around looking at all kinds of pets, we got closer to the room where the birds were kept. They were the only pets there that were kept in an actual room, probably because they were extremely noisy. We got there and stood in the door and looked in. There were cages from the bottom to ceiling on all 4 walls. There must have been hundreds of birds in all colors and sizes, and they were all hopping and fluttering around, screeching and tweeting. It was deafening. And it all stopped abruptly when we stood there. It was the weirdest thing ever. Every single bird suddenly sat still in their cages in total silence, and every single bird looked at us, like literally turned their heads to look at us. We looked around kind of shocked and felt uncomfortable. After a while, my friend's son pulled her hand and said, "I don't like it," and we stepped out backwards, and the second we stepped away from the door it was like a spell was broken and all birds went back to making a hell of a noise. No idea what happened there, but I will never forget that eerie feeling we had. One day, I was alone in my old house doing the dishes and I had a crock pot of chili on the counter beside me to my right. I had the TV on, which was in the living room to the left, so my head was turned to the left watching TV while I mindlessly scrubbed dishes. I was rinsing a glass, and it was calm and quiet in the kitchen with just the TV from the other room. Suddenly there was a huge crash and I turned my head and the crock pot of chili was in the middle of the kitchen floor, fully upside down, lid off and unplugged, so perfectly upside down that most of the chili was still inside the crock pot. Like, man. The counter wasn't wet. The crock pot wasn't on the edge or sliding around or anything, and it landed like 4 feet from the counter in the middle of the kitchen. I didn't bump into it, and I didn't hear a thing moving next to me until the moment it hit the floor. The weirdest thing that's ever happened in my life. I was right there and there was no valid reason for that to happen. Later, a glass soap bottle we had exploded out of nowhere. Hubby and I were in the other room and heard a crash, went into the kitchen and the bottle was in tons of pieces all over inside the sink. Again, nothing had been wet, nothing in the kitchen was moving, we didn't have a dishwasher or anything that was vibrating the counter and stuff like that. The glass bottle didn't have a topper and was just full of dish soap, so it's not like there was a buildup of gas in it or something. There was no reason for it. We called it our counterfeit.
Thanks for watching. Please comment, like, share and subscribe. The Internet Surfer on YouTube for more horror and scary stories.